So, good morning, everyone. Today, I would like to talk about addressing the underlying needs of primary actors in order to alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. So, firstly, moving towards the background of the conflict, Yemen was previously divided into North and South Yemen with the official recognition of North Yemen in 1962 until both sides were reunited in 1990. However, this led to a great social division with the existence of two competing Islamic ideologies, Shia and Sunni Muslims, with the Zaydi Shiites being the main Shia group in Yemen. In September 2014, the Houthi rebels belonging to the Zaydi Shiites took over the capital of Sana'a, believing that President Hadi's government was corrupt and marginalized Shia Muslims. This led to a Saudi coalition forming comprising of states such as UAE, UK, USA, and France, and them advancing into Yemen to restore Hadi's government in March 2015. However, this led to relentless armed combat and the use of airstrikes, leading to the deaths of innumerable civilians and the destruction of social infrastructure such as schools, hospitals, churches, etc. This has caused the humanitarian crisis we are now currently witnessing. So, for this particular topic, I used the case study methodology, which included using news articles, background reports, and professional briefs. Providing some statistical evidence, you can see that over 19,200 civilians were killed by airstrikes alone, with a third of all airstrikes from March 2015 to March 2020 hitting only civilian objects. This has led to over 4 million Yemenis being internally displaced and close to 20 million people in Yemen being food insecure. This goes to show how the humanitarian crisis in Yemen requires an urgent and swift response. So, moving on towards my research question, it is as follows. How can the underlying needs of actors be addressed in order to alleviate the effects of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen? Sub-questions include, how has armed conflict impacted the livelihood of Yemeni civilians? And how has the political exclusion of the Houthi rebels contributed to their role in the conflict? So, for the data analysis part, I was able to use a number of different conflict analysis tools, including but not limited to a needs fair map, a conflict map, and of course, as you can see, a conflict wheel. Through that, I was able to determine my primary actors, that being Saudi Arabia and the Yemeni government forming one bloc, the Yemeni civilians, and the Houthi rebel group with their political leader being Abdul Malik al-Houthi. Secondary actors include the USA, UAE, and UK, with tertiary actors being the UN, EU, and other humanitarian organizations. I believe the most prevalent issues are civilian deaths, instability, and of course collateral damage. Moving on towards my literature review, I was able to identify three main themes: intergroup conflict, power, and culture. I was able to use a vast theoretical framework which included theories such as authoritarianism, which mainly speaks about how competing powers have a greater focus on control and power rather than the freedom of civilians, which can be observed in the strategies adopted by both the Houthi rebels and Saudi Arabia, as they were so far entrenched within their own needs that they were willing to forego the rights of civilians. Furthermore, social dominance theory also tells us how dominant powers are often favored by relevant institutions in the international community, as seen with the international support for the Saudi intervention. So here are the needs of actors that I have sort of distinguished. I believe that these three needs fall under the basic and psychological needs pointed out by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Firstly, I believe that Saudi Arabia and the Yemeni government have a need for security and greater regional stability. Yemeni government, of course, as they need to securitize their state and eliminate a threat present within. However, Saudi Arabia is known to be an influential stakeholder when it comes to the dynamics of the Middle East. Thus, they are also greatly interested in eliminating the threat of the Houthi rebels. The Yemeni civilians, as seen with the data I had provided, are at the center of the conflict. They are the group that have faced the worst repercussions, and thus I believe that their need for physical and psychological safety is essential. Lastly, I believe that the Houthi rebel group's need for recognition is also highly essential. as the role they play within the conflict is primarily driven by this perceived marginalization they have faced and a lack of representation. Now, moving on towards my intervention strategies, the goal of these interventions is to reduce the insecurity of Yemeni civilians in order to prevent the humanitarian crisis from further intensifying. My first intervention is providing safe zones for Yemeni civilians. Now, these safe zones will not only provide Yemeni civilians with shelter from rampant attacks such as airstrikes, but will also provide them with food, water, shelter, medication, and essential resources, essentially addressing the civilians' need for safety, both physical and psychological. My second intervention is the disarmament or the demilitarization of the Houthi rebel group. Essentially, I believe this will address Saudi Arabia's need for security and regional stability, as demilitarizing the group will not only eliminate the threat, but will also play hand in hand with my third intervention, that being the political inclusion of the Houthi rebel group, that is, only if they agree to demilitarize. This will essentially address their need for recognition, as they will be a part of the larger political structure in Yemen. Moving on towards my SWOT analysis, I'm primarily going to focus on the opportunities and capacity building. So my interventions highlighted that I would develop town hall meetings which will allow for civil society organizations to prosper and actually become a part of the solution. This will essentially address the social and psychological needs of civilians as well, and help build capacity by developing a sense of empowerment within the local population. In essence, this can help strengthen the relationship between the civilians and local authorities. Another opportunity here is the representation of other minority groups in Yemen, and not just the Zaidi Shiites or the Shia minority. This can help develop a greater sense of human rights within Yemen and allow for a government-based committee on violence and a government budget for civil society organizations to prosper. Another opportunity can include strengthening the armed forces of Yemen by providing advanced weaponry and greater training. This will allow for the preservation of peace within Yemen and prevent future groups from gaining influence and wreaking havoc. So moving on towards my network map, I was able to identify a few barriers to social network development. Firstly, as you can see, there is the existence of two cliques, the yellow and green, with the yellow being the Sunni clique with the Yemeni government and Saudi policymakers, and the green being the Shia clique with the Houthi political wing and the Iranian government. Essentially, these two cliques are highly centralized and evidence low reachability and are perpetuated by the existence of homophily. Thus, I believe in this particular case, homophily serves as a barrier to social network development. Similarly, there are two main structural holes present here. Firstly, the structural hole between the Yemeni government and civilians, and secondly, the structural hole between the Yemeni government and the Houthi rebel group. These two structural holes essentially lead to a lack of communication between these actors and thus little to no collaboration. Thus, it is highly essential to address these. In order to combat these challenges to sustainability, I propose two main strategies. Firstly, social network development. I believe introducing Qatari mediators within the picture can help bridge the communication gap between the Houthi rebel group and the Yemeni government. Essentially, this will be more effective than introducing Saudi policymakers, as they are too far invested within the conflict to act as viable brokers. Similarly, bringing in humanitarian organizations can help develop a relationship and a flow of communication between civil society and the Yemeni government, as they possess the adequate social capital and experience to do so. According to Holman, large-scale interventions tend to fail if civilians are not involved, thus this is highly crucial. Secondly, I propose the development of transnational advocacy groups, which are essentially political spaces where various actors and stakeholders can come together to create a unanimous vision and common goal. This can lead to a greater social commitment to peace and to a resolution process within Yemen. Essentially, for this particular topic, a common goal can be the eradication of violence and the existence of peace within Yemen. Moving on towards the monitoring and evaluation process, I have particularly chosen the participatory action research method, which leads to the active involvement of all stakeholders within the process of decision making. Essentially, this will encompass routine interviews with community representatives, surveys amongst the civilian population, deploying on-ground field monitors and community informants. And this can help create the existence of sort of a unanimous vision and a collaborative process that will allow for a greater understanding of the real-time on-ground situation rather than just looking at quantitative data. Some indicators I've pointed out for success include a decrease in the civilian death toll, a decrease in the number of food insecure or displaced civilians, a reduction in arms trafficking, and the dismantlement of Houthi military infrastructure. According to Downs and Stedman, it is also essential to define peace within your particular topic. So I believe for this particular topic, peace would be the alleviation of human suffering and the eradication of armed combat. To conclude, I believe addressing the individual needs of primary actors can help create an environment that is more conducive to sustainable change and long-term peace. Essentially, increasing the communications between various stakeholders can allow for them to better understand each other's perspective and essentially find a greater common ground. I believe that the interventions I propose can help empower Yemeni society and build capacity to prevent future conflicts from occurring. Here are my references. Thank you so much.
Do you have a question?
I do.
Okay. Take it away.
Shahzad, how do you see your strategies for network development supporting or relating to your strategies for your resolution strategies?
For example, in network development, I propose bringing in humanitarian organizations to help develop that flow of communication between civil society and the Yemeni government. So essentially that plays hand in hand with my interventions, as within the opportunities and capacity building part, I mentioned that it is essential to also bring in organizations such as the WFP or the UNHRC for the government to better understand how to deal with the humanitarian crisis, how to set up safe zones. So I believe that these two sort of correlate to achieve that larger purpose within Yemen. Thank you.
Super, thank you.
Thank you.